Hello everyone. So today is the day that we call Maundy Thursday. It's a very unusual word, but it's the day before Good Friday. And in our Christian year, often when we're able to gather in worship, we might gather for a service on Maundy Thursday evening, and often we do what's called a Tenebrae service, or the service of shadows, where we read scripture and we gradually extinguish the candles until there's none left, and then we go out in darkness to prepare for Good Friday. So our scripture reading today is from John chapter 13. It's a well-known passage, I'm sure. Jesus washes the disciples' feet. So it's the first 20 verses of John chapter 13. So I'm not going to read it now, but you might like to do that after. So as we heard yesterday, Judas has already made the decision to betray his Lord and Master, a hateful act of cowardice. So it's remarkable then, we read this story where Jesus voluntarily takes the place of a servant washing his disciples' feet, even in the midst of betrayal. I don't know about you, but I think that's the last thing I'd be thinking of doing. Now, of course, foot washing was nothing new in the era when Jesus lived. Obviously, people walked everywhere. They wore sandals, the roads were dusty. And so normally it would be the host or a servant who would wash the guests' feet if they'd been travelling out on the dusty road. So it was an act of honour for a host to actually wash a guest's feet. And it was a sign of dishonour not to do that. So it wouldn't be unusual for the disciples to know about foot washing. What was unusual is that it was Jesus doing this. And of course we know that in the story we hear of good old Peter. I love Peter and his impetuous nature. And when Jesus comes to Peter, it's all just too much. No, Lord, you're not going to wash my feet. That's like the last thing he just cannot think of his Lord and Master as a servant washing his feet. I don't know if you've had anybody ever wash your feet, maybe in a foot washing service, but I've had that privilege a few times and it always brings me to tears. I think it's a very intimate act. And so here was Jesus kneeling in front of Peter, about to wash his feet, and it was all too much for Peter. So it's really interesting how Jesus responds to that. But still, after Jesus' comment, poor old Peter, he still misses the point. And so he asks Jesus not to just wash his feet, but his head and his hands and everything. And of course, Jesus replies that a person who's already clean doesn't need his whole body washed, only their feet. And then Jesus goes on to say that not everyone who was with him on that occasion was clean. And of course, we know that he was referring to Judas. So on this Maundy Thursday, I want to ask you a question. What would you do if you knew that you would die a violent death in about 12 hours? Would you want to be alone in prayer? Would you want to record maybe some final thoughts for your family and your loved ones? Maybe you'd want to spend time with those loved ones. What do you think you'd really want to emphasize if you knew you only had that amount of time? Maybe you might even want to share your favorite recipe or perhaps a gardening tip. Maybe you'd want to focus on something that's really important in your life. So it's interesting that here we have Jesus, who knew that the time had come for him to leave this world. And look what he does. He takes off his coat, he puts a towel around his waist, and he washes the dirty feet of his disciples. Why? Because he wanted to show them how important it is to humbly serve one another. What an example. There's a story told of Mother Teresa when she visited Phoenix in 1989 to open a home for the poor. And during that brief visit, she was interviewed by the largest radio station in town. In a private moment, the announcer asked Mother Teresa if there was anything he could do for her. He was expecting her to maybe request a contribution or some media attention to help raise money for this new home for the needy. Instead, she replied, yes, there is. Find somebody nobody else loves and love them. Think about that. Find somebody nobody else loves and love them. In this time of COVID-19, we have an incredible opportunity to demonstrate what it means to be a servant like Jesus. So I invite you to take some time today to think about who might you be able to serve in a new way during this time that we're in. How could you show Jesus love? Let me just finish with that beautiful song, and you might like to sing this, but I'm just going to quote the chorus. This is our God, the servant King. He calls us now to follow him, to give our lives as a daily offering of worship to the servant King. So may God bless each one of you as you enter into the passion of Jesus over these next days.